All right, now let's talk about all this. Joining us, Kevin Hassett, former Council of Economic Advisors chair, author of the most important book of the new century. It's called The Drift, The Fight Against Socialism. Kevin, before we get to the new Jean Le Carré movie, let's just talk for a moment about the Fed. I think the interest rate hike is much more boring part of today's story. But they kind of did what the markets expected. Stock market went up. In your judgment, how close are they, to their goal of a restrictive Fed funds rate or bringing the inflation rate down significantly?
I think they're a little closer than I thought the last time you and I had a pretty pessimistic conversation about it, because the recession, which we're likely going to see started in January when we get the data tomorrow, is driving down a lot of commodity prices, and that's usually the first step. I know you've been talking about gold for your whole life, really. and once those commodity prices go down, then as you said, you sort of go down from 9 to 10% to maybe 7 or 6%. And so they might be getting a little bit of anti-inflationary momentum out of the declining GDP. But as you're saying, their rate hikes haven't really hit the GDP yet. And so I expect that we are probably going to see a deep contraction, especially over the second half of the year, because that's when the Fed policy is going to start to bite. And it's good to see that they went to 0.75 of a point, because remember, getting a quarter point out of them was really, really hard when inflation was clearly happening already, because they said it was transitory. And so I think, the markets are celebrating, because a lot of times what happens is markets collapse when they see a recession coming, but then they start recovering before the recession's over, because markets are always forward-looking. And so we could almost get to that point. I think we'd certainly get to that point if there was a turnover in Congress in November. But the Fed made the right move. Let's hope they keep it 75 basis points for the next few meetings, and then they'll, hopefully be close to where they need to be.
That's a good point, though. The stock market, which was getting killed, I don't know, a few weeks ago, has, I'm going to say, stabilized. I don't know that there's a rally going. Some people think it's a bear market rally. I'm not smart enough to know that. I'm not in the market anymore. But think about this, Kevin, for a minute. On an optimistic note, we're not going to get any tax hikes because Joe Manchin worked his magic and said no. The Supreme Court, in probably their most consequential ruling, ruled against the regulatory bureaucracy in West Virginia versus the EPA and said they cannot make these, socialist planning decisions without congressional legislation. We had Senator Mitch McConnell on about that yesterday. And the Fed is taking action. And, I watched commodity indexes, price of gold is down, so forth, as you mentioned. The worst of that may be over, although it's going to be a long haul. I mean, then the cavalry's coming, so we're going to take the House for sure, maybe the Senate. So we'll certainly stop the bad stuff. So maybe the stock market is kind of, in a longer-term sense, sniffing out better news. In effect, sniffing out that the Biden, lefty progressive policies are dead in the water.
Right. And let's not forget that, our friend Joe Sullivan had this great piece at National Review today where he showed that only one president has had a worse stock market over the same time frame in their presidency, and that was Jerry Ford. But amongst elected presidents, Biden's in last place in terms of the performance of the stock market since he's been inaugurated through this point in his term. And I think that what that means really is that, especially at the beginning, markets were terrified that this, radical AOC agenda was maybe going to become law. And now they're sort of seeing that, as you said, the cavalry's coming. The Fed has acted independently. They've been tough on inflation rather than, sort of caving and trying to, help the Biden administration by not raising rates. And so I think that we're maybe moving back towards normalcy. I think an election that took away the power of the radical left would probably get us the rest of the way there. And if it were me, I would start to expect the market to look forward to that. I'd watch the betting markets. I think it's about 80% that Republicans capture the House. If the betting markets stay up there, then I think the market will start to give you that sort of political rally before the election itself.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like the Supreme Court says no to Biden's agenda. Joe Manchin said no to Biden's agenda. Jay Powell is doing what he's doing. And the political situation says no to Biden's agenda. I mean, every poll rejects him. So he's been stopped, Kevin. I mean, I don't want to say with great certainty because it's hard to figure these things out. But in a sense, you know, you and I like to take a longer-term view of these things. I mean, the economy is going to go through pain. It's already slumping. You know, we're either in a recession or on the front end of a recession, but it's a slump, and it's a high inflation slump, right? And it's going to be painful to wring that out. But everybody's saying no to Joe Biden, and therefore that's probably good for America.
Right, but I also want to say that I don't think that Biden's policy making is done, in the sense that I don't really know what the guy believes. And if Republicans or Republicans plus moderate Democrats have a big victory in November, and then they come forward next year with reasonable plans like your plans to have a supply side stimulus bill to try to get help get inflation down, I'm not sure he wouldn't sign it. Right, and I think that markets are probably that way too. I think that reasonable bills next year to fix the economy might well be signed by Joe Biden, because I don't think anybody really knows what he believes. But a lot of times, what happens when there's divided government is that presidents are looking for a win ahead of a re-election campaign, and they're willing to sign bipartisan bills. And so I'm actually quite hopeful for policy next year. And I think that one of the positive signs, which was discussed at the America First Policy Institute Summit yesterday, is that Kevin McCarthy is getting ready. I mean, he's not counting his chickens, but he's got all these task forces out there planning legislation that they want to pass next year that's going to be so obviously addressing the needs of the country that Biden will have to sign it. And I think there's a chance that some of that stuff will get through. And so I'm starting to get a little more optimistic myself. And I've been pretty dark since January, right? So
right. I don't know. That position has had a good run, but these things are evolving in very good ways, which reject all of the left-wing progressivism. Kevin, let me move on to my Jean Le Carré movie that's being constructed with all these reports of the Fed. The reserve banks have had trouble with Chinese-related research assistance over time. The Fed did an investigation back in 2015. Now new things are emerging. This guy was in his hotel room and they broke into it. The Homeland Security operations. This is Rob Portman, who can have a starring role in my movie. He can take the Gary Oldman spot in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. But this is very serious stuff, is it not? If the Fed is hacking and espionage and recruiting Fed staffers to give inside information, Kevin, tell us what you know or what you think about this, please.
Right. Well, my first instinct is to make light of it, because if we want to really harm China, they should start using the Fed models. And so if they're stealing the Fed models, then they're going to fall apart, right? Just like we are right now. But the truth is, though, that there is a lot going on in that space, and you and I know that we can't talk about everything, but we know that the Chinese are very aggressively pursuing, U.S. economists, hacking their emails, the Fed, and they took this guy in his room and threatened him. I just before I went into government had a Chinese trip with a bunch of senior people, and some of the most senior people, had these very attractive women show up at their rooms at 11 o'clock at night. While I was in the White House, was harassed by, they might not have been related to the Chinese government, but there were Chinese people harassing me and my son while we were playing basketball. They're really here in the U.S. And the thing that I would say is that there are all these Chinese students that are incredibly talented, and a huge share of them are obviously not spies, but a whole bunch of them are spies or worry about their parents who are still back in China. And a lot of those folks over the years have gotten into positions at Federal Reserve banks and at the Fed where they had access to extremely important classified information. And I think that the investigation suggests that turned into a problem. And if it were me, I would continue to dig. I would like to know, for example, let's get a list of how many Chinese nationals have worked at the Fed over the last 15 years and where they were, and then start to investigate, what they're up to. Because we know, you and I know, the Chinese government has a very detailed plan for just about everything, and one of them is infiltrating U.S. government agencies through hacking and through individuals. And we now know that they're even, I've for one, just given my own experience here in Washington, would never go to China again. And I think that I kind of wonder if if the Federal Reserve, if there's a conference in China and the Federal Reserve is letting people go there, they need to really train them, right? Like you and I, if we were going to a country like China when we were in the White House, what do? We ditched our phones and got a special phone just for that, because they're going to take over your phone. We didn't take our laptops. Remember, they gave us a special laptop that had nothing on it, so that
we knew
if we were using a laptop, because everybody was sure they were going to get our laptop and our phones. I wonder if the Fed is taking those security measures. I would really like to know the answer.
I mean, we knew that in the hotel room was completely covered by China. Phones, laptops, as you say.
Right.
I just to wrap this up, I mean, look, Jay Powell is denying this, but these headlines, the Wall Street Journal, with Tim Arias and then Kate O'Keefe, China targeted Fed to build informal network and access data. Then I got a second one from the Washington Times. Senate investigation reveals China's effort to infiltrate Federal Reserve. Then I got one from, the head of Fox Business, big headline, China targeted Federal Reserve employees in an attempt to undermine American monetary policy. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I don't know why Jay Powell is going to deny it. Jay Powell should just say, we're working on it to get guardrails and safeguards and patch up our weaknesses where possible. I mean, we want the Fed to help us on this. Otherwise, it's going to be a war. And, guys like Rob Portman take Homeland Security very, very seriously. I'll give you the last word on this. But this story, I think, Kevin, is going to spread. It's a big story.
It's going to be, Nick's a great reporter, and the fact that his name was on that means, and he's really wired in at the Fed. The thing I could say, as you know, I worked at the Fed. I was senior economist at the Fed, and I have a lot of friends there. My understanding of what's going on is that there was a problem that was discovered some years back, and then a lot of very aggressive measures were taken to address the problem, and that the problem is viewed by the Fed right now as having been resolved, that they're not making the mistakes they made in the past. And so I'm not so nervous that they're infiltrated and they're there now. I think that there was something that went on that fixed things in the past, and it wasn't necessarily covered in the media the way it could have been, but it's now coming out in the Wall Street Journal, and I think we'll find out the rest of the story. But my understanding is that a lot of people at the Fed feel like there was some kind of problem. They don't necessarily always know exactly what it was, but that they took very severe steps to address it, and now the problem is fixed. I think that's what they think.
Kevin, if we do a new John le Carre movie, do you want to be in it?
I don't know. Do they need like a dumpy economist?
They need a good econometrician. MI6 needs a really first-rate econometrician. Kevin Hassett, thank you, buddy. Please read his book, folks.